Today's city is an enigma. Its dimensions, rapid transformations, its heterogeneity make it difficult to apprehend. The difficulty to understand the modern city comes from the large discrepancy between what we expect from it and what it is actually offering to us. It is important to be reminded that the landscape is above all a cultural and mental concept. As the main theorists of the landscape argue, our visual perception of our surroundings is constantly influenced by subconscious patterns, images and feelings influenced by the literature, the cinema, advertising campaigns or television that all together shape our experience. Today's difficulty to grasp the city in its huge dimensions, urban forms and shapes so far unknown, would thus result from us only being able to judge a city according to the traditional aesthetical criteria. This world of postcards and advertising posters shows what we focus on in the city, its historical center. The whole idea of the city boils down to a very limited space, dynamic and attractive, and even sometimes to a unique symbol, as it is the case for Paris and the Eiffel Tower. In 85% of the commercials staged in Paris, the Eiffel Tower appears and represents, with its 315 meters of iron, all the Parisian art of life and glamour. The mental landscape of global cities has thus become a chain of stereotypes and symbols connected together. Of course, narrowing down a whole city to a very limited space will not make it easy to apprehend the landscape at the metropolitan scale. I suggest to dive into this complex and evolving landscape, similar to a maze, and try to analyze it through our common subconscious, the vision of the media and the arts. One of the most common ways of understanding the city at large is to consider it as a technical object. From the video games that allow you to build your own city, and some advertising campaigns, such as Areva's one, emerges the idea that the city simply exists and develops because some tubes are connected together. Roads, energy, and water are in sufficient amounts to allow the city to be born and expand to the infinite. The development of all kinds of networks would thus be the primary force that gives their shapes to contemporary cities. The primacy of the technology is also reflected in the importance given to infrastructures, especially transportation ones. They keep developing and expanding, always occupying more space on the ground. Little by little, they transform the city into a moving machine. From the perspective of the landscape, these infrastructures are very problematic. The lines and interconnections they create are responsible for building new barriers between territories and dividing once unified territories into separate entities. The result is the development of uncontrolled and chaotic landscapes, tearing apart the horizon line or staging for several hundred meters a terrifying and enormous cloverleaf intersection. The images that result from this supremacy of the technology in the process of the city-making are especially strong in dystopia and science fiction art. In this imaginary world, global mobility and the urban sprawl transform the city into a scary creature. It is only formed by a multitude of identical cubes, behind which the horizon line disappears. Japan is a vast factory of this kind of landscape, where new Tokyos are born in the midst of a total chaos. In this infinite city, density slowly declines. The urban fabric stretches and weakens and gives room to neglected and empty spaces. Outside of the city center, it is the reign of the suburb, pictured as a bleak, monochromatic, and empty land. It is a space that is vitally connected to the city, but in which you don't feel like belonging to it. We refer to it as the suburb and not the suburbs, as all around the world, the suburb is characterized by its vast spaces, and the similarities between the suburbs win over local specificities. However, the urban shapes imposed on us by the rule of the technology are not necessarily a constraint. Urban planners and graphic designers call for using technology as a tool to transform the landscape. They indeed imagine megastructures that could also give an identity to a territory at big scale. It is the case of the Fuller Dome that could have, according to its creator, embraced the whole Manhattan Island, or the superstructure of the continuum that keep reappearing in the work of many contemporary architects. Another motivating cause in this context is the need to invent a new relation to our natural environment. As the nature retreated to give room to urban development, the classical contradiction between the nature and the city no longer has a purpose. We can dream of vegetal cities in which nature is not just a pleasing detail limited to the area of a park, but becomes a main component of the urban culture. These images of uncontrolled and chaotic landscapes show everyone's fear of the city as a sprawling and wild element. Our imagination also prompts us to take up the challenge of creating a city under control and inventing another relation to the city as a whole, to its infrastructures, its centralities, and to nature. We notice a major transformation in the form the city takes, in what the eyes see in the city. At the same time, our urban habits are also undergoing an important transformation and change our perception. This trend is reinforced by the growing importance of numeric technology and rapid mobility. Mobility, one of the main symbols of modernity, has kept improving for the last 50 years, to the point of becoming central in our lives. In many imaginary scenarios, cities are primarily a sum of many flows composed of various means of transportation, such as the flying car or the aerotube. Everywhere lies the phantasm of a perfectly fluid city, similar to a giant anthill. Commercials and advertising prompt us to always keep moving, and implies that the concept of contiguity in the urban environment has been overthrown and replaced by the one of the continuous movement. In the era of mobility, it is not the distance between two given points that we measure, but the time it takes to get from one to the other. This trend is strengthened by the generalized use of GPS devices that allow us to always find any kind of directions. It is no longer necessary to pay attention to our environment to find our way. The GPS does it for us. From this was born a city entirely at our disposal, in which we're free to take only what we want, the great danger being forgetting that we're linked to a specific territory. The geography of flows, showing human activity at different times of the day, superimposes on the real urban morphology and shows us another face of the city that seems to be more and more relevant. The disappearance of physical constraints, when apprehending the space, comes along with a new attention to what makes the city unique and to its closest environment. Many research and initiatives use digital technology to initiate us to the city of sounds, surreptitious perceptions, and emotional intensity. Talking about the contemporary landscape, and thus the one of the continuously moving city, is actually talking about the intensity of the city, about the numerous incitations sent to us by advertising screens, unexpected encounters, reflections, furtive views and collisions, and also by a landscape moving fast before our eyes. This is the striking landscape seen by the one traveling and watching the landscape change through the window of the train he or she is on. It is in the end a privileged way of feeling and discovering the metropolitan landscape in its large dimensions. It seems that today, landscapes are far from being unequivocal. They can change frequently and easily. Mobility does not mean the death of the landscape and the rise of a modern man completely disconnected with his natural environment, only living in digital landscapes. It just means that there are many kinds of landscape to take into account. In the end, despite the scary perspective of some new urban transformations, due to the improvement of the technique and the technology, the majority of these transformations is the sign of a new way of apprehending the city. They might be the new design of the ultra-modern city that François Hacher wished for, a city in always more intense, a city of all uses, that pleases the walker as well as the stockbroker, the passerby as well as the car driver, an attentive and flexible city.